All right, guys, welcome. This is the second episode of the Martial Praxis podcast. Today we have Carlmichael. He's a really good friend of mine, and he runs a gym down in South Florida called Ground Game Theory, and they do all ecological training now. So I wanted to interview him and pick his brain and try to get as much information out of him as we could about this method of training, how it's been working for him. Very happy to have you here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, buddy.
Um, so jumping right in, like practice design, right? This is something that I've been playing with a lot. Is so what I get from Greg, right? And like I kind of go back and forth between like he's Yoda and I should listen to everything he says and do
Same.
everything his way, but then also like I'm an individual and like I can think for myself, like I'm not stupid. So
hmm And,
um
and frankly, he prefers it that way. That's sort of the whole
yes,
idea behind this thing.
yeah. Yeah, when I went to train with him, I did a lesson with him and he was basically like he was like you have a solid understanding of this. You clearly have like read some of the literature like, you know, take it away, do your own thing. So I'm curious what you do with like the question of like he seems to prefer to play the whole game each session and something that I've been kind of leaning towards is like taking some knowledge about that I have and focusing on a particular position or a family of techniques. Like maybe we're working on triangles, right? And like spend a whole class working on different games around the triangle choke. What
hmm
how do you deal with that in your gym?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that I struggle with pretty consistently because, things change. My training environment changes all the time.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing to address is that like you went to Standard, you trained with him at
Yep.
Standard. Yeah, so
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you got to feel with the room for how many days? Like a week or so?
I was there for like 3 days. It was really short. It was the
Ah,
weekend, so I
okay.
didn't get to do too many practices.
Yeah.
So it was very limited.
Yeah. What I noticed when I went there is like his training room felt very different than mine. Like they were all on a different they had a different understanding of how the
Yeah.
practice was run and stuff. So they would listen to him differently than my because I'm earlier on. I've been doing it for a year. He's been doing it for six plus.
Yeah.
Now I'm starting to see my guys really understand the approach better and start to learn more efficiently with it. But
No, that's a
yeah,
really important point. Is like
yeah.
different groups of people. Like you have a group of hobbyists, you have a group of competitors. Like you have to approach those very differently,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
also
So
just in different gyms, it's different.
yeah, and like so I try to play the whole game every day, but man, I mean, sometimes I realize that these guys really need to work on something else right then and there. The big consideration there though is overusage because before when I would do the traditional approach and I would study a system, I would play that system for a month sometimes even, and
Yeah.
and and I didn't really realize until after the fact that I was destroying, like for example, if I played leg entanglements for a month, I would have tremendous lower back pain, like
Interesting.
so much tightness in my abductors.
Yes.
My
Yes.
body
Yeah.
was breaking every week.
Yeah.
So I don't see that there's an issue with that as long as it doesn't lead to overusage. I think a whole class is fine. That's not going to bother.
Like
But
yeah.
maybe
Like
like a
that's a
whole
good
week of
point.
triangles might fuck someone's neck up or some
Yeah.
shit,
Or even there are like hamstrings. Like you're doing all that biting with your legs.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's a good point for like longevity purposes. Like that's like the variability works in favor of that. Like as we change between different movements and different things, like we're gonna preserve our bodies better. That's a really good point.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
That's my big consideration, like safety. And that because I mean, you know me, bro. I used to get injured every single week. But since we've done the ecological approach, and I've switched from drilling for 30 to sometimes even an hour per class to
yeah,
just a lot to 60 minutes of live work, 40 to 60 minutes every class, I'm getting injured less, even though the
yes,
volume's increased because there's just so
yeah.
much variability.
I also think that, and this is something that I talked a little bit about with Brandon that goes on like when you're training with people who are better, that it's a little bit you're less likely to get injured. But I think what the beautiful thing about like CLA, like constraints led approach, is that because you give somebody a directive, right? That's intelligent. Like there's a directive in the position. Like you're playing half guard and you're telling that person, hey, you need to go chest to chest. It creates a coherent environment. So like the two grapplers, they're both aware of the critical objective, and they're fighting over that in a zero sum manner, and like that creates like a real grappling exchange versus like when you, even if you were to take some beginners, right, and have them do live rolls, what ends up happening is it's chaotic because they don't necessarily know what to do in each position. So if you take two experienced grapplers who have an idea of what they want to do from each position, it tends to be a more coherent exchange of grappling. But then what's cool about this is with CLA, you get something that I talk about, which is like it's hyper representative of grappling. Like you actually can get grappling that's more representative than actually just free sparring, because people who wouldn't otherwise know what to do in a free sparring encounter are actually able to focus on a particular objective and then give each other much better resistance and feedback than they would if they were just allowed to fight in general. And I also think this reduces the injuries.
Yeah, yeah, I see that all the time where like a day one walks in and you're like just starting a single, like hold on to that as long as you can. And before you know it, like they look like they know what they're doing, you know,
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
instead of them overthinking, oh, my hand has to be this way, my head needs to be on the inside, I need to be like when they overthink, they freeze up and it all falls
Yes.
apart very quickly.
I mean, I've seen that with a lot of. It's funny, like, because I was never into drilling. I always hated drilling,
Yeah.
right? And it's super funny that we're having this conversation now because when I started training with you back in the day, like I probably did more drilling with you than I did at any other point in my life.
Yeah.
Like I was like, no, this guy's smart. He's good. Like he's telling me I should drill. I'm like, all right, fine, I'll drill. Like I really don't want to
You know how many people have told me that now?
though. But I always hated drilling, and I usually was like working at the gym that I was training at too. So I usually had to work during the part of class where we would drill, and I would just jump on the mat for rolls. So I
Perfect.
basically
Perfect.
did most of my jujitsu career without any drilling. Um, so
And honestly, it showed like you had a very funky style. There's a lot of novelty to the
yes,
way you grapple. Like when we competed, you know, when you caught me in the sleeveless Ezekiel, like that's something I
I
hadn't
never caught you
experienced.
in
But
again.
yeah, yeah. But it happens once. It was novel. I couldn't solve the problem right then and there. So, you know, if maybe if my training, you know, if I injected more novelty in my training at that time, maybe I could have dealt with that better, you know?
Yeah, no, totally. So I just think that with when it comes to like the way these exchanges start to play out, that when you allow there to be more creativity and more novelty, that like you know it it just it allows for um more, basically it's more variability in what you end up doing. I mean, I had a kid who came in, it was his first class doing jujitsu ever, right? And using constraints led approach and playing games, I had him finishing triangle chokes in
Oh,
one day
sweet. Yeah.
on resisting opponents.
Hmm.
And it that's not possible with drilling. Like I've
Yeah.
tried it. Like it's not possible. So I
I
just
don't know
think
if you
that
heard this thing too, but like whenever I started doing jujitsu, I would always hear people say, "Oh, you're not gonna get your first sub till 6 months in, or it's
yes,
a minimum."
yeah, and that's really just because of a weak pedagogy. I mean, that's really the only reason for that. With this approach, I think you can get stuff like that happening
I
much
see it happen all the time. I mean, people come in off the streets and in their first class, they're like hitting arm bars.
faster.
You know, we'll start them close to it. Maybe we'll start hips to shoulders. You know, but nonetheless, they look like they know what they're doing. They're exploring the space and they're making it happen. You know,
Super
you
cool.
don't get to see that otherwise. You know, I'll give you another example. I had a white belt who had been training us for like 3 months. I had him start in like a position. Yeah, because if I want them to learn something new, I'll start them in the alignment. I'm sure you're familiar with this because Greg talks about it all the time.
Yeah.
So like I saw like a lot of my room wasn't really doing any toe holds. They're doing ankle locks,
Yep.
heel hooks, but they weren't exploring toe holds. So I had them start with the grip, the figure four
Yep.
grip on the toes. Um, and I had a white belt who was like 2, 3 months into jujitsu. Do it. And we played the game once in a class, and I think next week I saw him rolling live, and he entangled the legs, threw his legs to the outside, started, you know, he got a perfect figure four toe hold on, you know, and he didn't hit it. he didn't like submit the guy, but he was. I saw the intention was there.
Yeah,
He
it was
it
all
was
there.
he got the grip right. I mean, obviously we still need to fine tune these things, but nonetheless,
No, I think that's a
one
great
6 minute
strategy.
round, and it was a
Yeah.
white belt, like who's been training for three
No, you can
months.
develop a new move in 6 or 12 minutes this way if you just like, and this is a good approach that people can take is just you start them in the end point, like starting in spiderweb or even starting with the hands disconnected in the arm lock break position and
For
just saying,
sure.
okay, extend the arm and keep the arm extended, or like you said, starting with the toe hold grip. Um, these are like really really valuable tools. Another question I have for you is like when you design practice, like I'm guessing you probably put some thought into it beforehand. Like you're kind of like coming
Yeah.
in with a little bit of an idea of what you want to do, but then also like as you're watching the room and what's going on, we kind of touched on this before. Like how do you modify like what's going on? Maybe you can even give an example of like a time where like you had planned some games or a particular game and like people were really doing something weird and funky that you weren't expecting and you're like, okay, I have to adjust these constraints to fix this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll say first of all, it happens all the time where I'll design practice for somebody, they don't even show up.
Yeah,
Like,
trust me, I've been through that
yeah,
too.
so you kind of got to pivot
That's
a
the
little bit
worst.
there, but it
we
is
had a
what it is.
kid get we had a kid get like smashed in Keisagatame in competition, and I designed like a whole week of Keisagatame escape games, like using the underhook to get out,
Right.
freeing the near side elbow, like all this stuff, and he was out the whole week, and I was
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like, oh my
yeah,
god,
yeah.
like everybody else got really good at
He's
this.
on vacation.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I guess there's no black and white answer to this. I have to deal with these things differently every time. But I think generally I try to design the practice in a way that most of the room can benefit from. So
yeah,
sometimes I'll let them run with it anyways if I think that this room will benefit from that practice and it's higher up on the priority list.
yep,
Um, and then this is also something I learned from Greg. It doesn't matter what you do first, it matters what you do next. Like
yeah,
if I look at the room and I'm like, I don't really know where to start. I'm like, let's start with this one game or this one set of games, and we'll see how the room is looking, and we'll go from there. And usually from there, I'm like, oh, these guys suck at isolating arms or whatever it
yeah,
is, like like, and I could kind of design things from there. But usually, I try to prioritize by the competitors, the guys who care the most. Um, and even if they're not competitors, if they just show that they care to get better and they
yeah.
show up all the time and they're about it, I'm about it with them. So
Yeah, Greg was saying something about this that I really like resonated with, where he was like, yeah, like I don't really like when people write themselves off as a hobbyist, and like I kind of agree with that
yeah,
because it's like I don't care if you train, like you probably shouldn't train one time a week, but like if you can only make it to class twice a week, like that's totally cool, but don't limit yourself within those 2 times a week by saying, oh, I'm a hobbyist, like I don't really have to learn anything, I don't have to try that hard, like you're
yeah,
kind of selling yourself short. Like, there's lots of people who have gotten really good who only train once a day or, 3 times a week. Like you can make a lot happen as far as progressing in jujitsu and understanding jujitsu. And some of the best students I have this one guy who trains with me he's a lot older, but he's kind of like a lifetime martial artist. And like he doesn't compete. He's like over 50, but he just loves learning and he's one of the most enjoyable and best students that I have. And it's like, that's the example of people who I like. Those are the students that you want, right? Like it's
yeah,
like he doesn't
facts.
he doesn't have to compete or like be the best person in the room, but he's trying to understand and learn everything that's being taught.
Yeah, yeah. That's something that Greg talks about a lot is like trainings for competition.
Yeah,
Some people try to act like it's just because you're not signing up for the tournament doesn't mean that you're not competing. You still compete with your buddy Joe every
yeah,
time you show up to practice or whatever. You're still trying to get better, so
still
don't sell yourself
competitive.
short. Yeah,
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 yeah. Yeah, I also see that like the microcosm of that where I see just people selling themselves short in the rounds themselves, like where they just quit so easily because
or
they're there
don't
for
even pay attention to the task directly.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
another weird one. Like it's always funny, and this is one of those really like ironic things, right? Is like people who don't like constraints-led approach and they prefer drilling and technique will always forget the task objective. And I'm like, you want to learn a technique with 16 steps, but you
Oh my
can't
God.
remember this one thing. I'm
Well,
like,
you were in the group chat to see the latest
yes.
drop. Like, bro, you're in practice every day. I give you one objective, like put their back to the floor, and you're doing flying triangles. Like, how are you gonna how are you gonna remember a 20-step sequence? How are you gonna argue for this? You know, it doesn't make any sense.
It's very funny, like with CLA that the only first of all, the only people that I know that argue against it genuinely don't understand what it is, which bothers me because like I'm a very grouchy negative person when it comes to a lot of things, but I understand the things I don't like. You know, like
Right.
I want to understand something before I decide that I hate it. You know, like
Yeah.
I'm not just like gonna hate something and not understand it. So most of the arguments you hear against CLA are often actually just like arguments for CLA. You know, like people will be
Right.
like, they'll be like, everybody's different. So different things work for everybody. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly why you
That's
shouldn't drill a single optimal technique. Like,
yeah. I'm glad
like
you
yeah,
point that
people are
out.
different. So we should let them try different things.
Right.
It's like so weird. Um, but then
Oh
yeah,
my
another
God.
one is like is is these people who they're like, no, I want to learn a technique and then can't remember a single objective. Like they can't remember one thing. And it's like, guys, like if you can't remember one thing, how are you gonna do this thing that has, 20 steps?
It's fun.
One
It's funny you say that because like I got into when I first heard a Rob Gray BJJ Mental Models podcast before
yeah,
even hearing about Greg and the one of my students sent it to me. I'm like, this sounds pretty interesting. But I didn't see how it could be executed until I saw Greg post all that stuff
yeah,
on his page, and then I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But to me, because honestly, when I first saw it, and I was so used to the Ashigarami language,
yeah,
inside Sankaku bullshit, I'm the simple language was actually complicated to me at first.
yes.
It was
Well,
a strange thing for me, but I saw what he was doing instantly. I'm like, there's something to this, but you gotta drill. And I was just such a naysayer, not such a naysayer, but I was so hesitant to fully adopting it just
yeah,
because of traditionalism. But I
yes,
kept hearing Greg at the very end of every podcast be like, all right, don't listen to me. There's plenty of research on this. There's other scientists that you can listen to as well. I didn't invent this, and he wasn't selling anything at the time. He
yeah,
wasn't selling anything.
yeah. No, he didn't
So
have
that was
anything.
very convincing to me. So when I heard that, I'm like, I'm gonna read about this so I could poke holes in it.
Yeah,
And the more I read about it, the more I'm like, fuck, I'm just poking holes in
yeah. You're like
my
there
own
are
shit.
no holes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or at
Like the
least
same
compared to
person.
the
Like
what I had going.
yeah, it's funny because I kind of had the opposite thing where like I said, look, I've always really hated drilling,
Yeah.
and uh, I always had this thing over people who drilled a lot. Like I would roll with like when I competed against you or like Cade was huge on drilling all these systems, right? And like I would roll with him, and I knew I could like hear him in my head thinking about the system. So I would just do something, and I'm familiar with these systems, but I don't play them like that. So I could kind of like feel him or hear him thinking about, oh, okay, if he goes here, I'm gonna do there, and I would just do something unexpected, and
Right.
I could see how, or I would do a move that like I remember one time we were doing leg locks, and I used a steering wheel toe hold on him, and he was like, what is that? And I'm like, it's a move
I
that's
twisted your
not
foot.
yeah, like it's a move that's not in the system that you play, which I did on purpose, knowing that mentally you think that way. And
Right.
we have a guy in our gym now who like he's like just loves drilling Gordon and Danaher stuff. And every time I roll with him, like I'll just like yesterday we were rolling and I was just foot sweeping him with like Shuaijiao, Mongolian wrestling, judo stuff, and
Hmm.
he's just like, "What's happening to me?" And I'm like, "It's just stuff that's outside your wheelhouse, and I'm just
Yeah.
giving
It's
it to you
novelty.
because yeah, like because I know that you're really susceptible to novelty,
Right.
because you don't have this mindset of training live with variability. So,
He's over constrained.
yeah. So when I first encountered this stuff, I was like, was like, oh my God, this is what I've been saying this whole time. I was like,
Yeah.
this is like somebody actually is explaining what I think in a
Right.
way that makes sense. It doesn't just sound like me being blasé. Like I think people just thought I was like messing with them and I was like secretly doing a whole bunch of drilling when no one was looking. But
Right.
like, you know, what I would do really in my training was like I would play games with myself and my partner. Like I was sort of doing like a covert CLA where I would just kind of be like, it's not the same because there's so much value in your opponent knowing your objective because that creates this direct conflict over this critical, like this in like almost like this invariant thing that you need to do in a particular position. And then you have this, both people are aware of it. So I do think CLA is better, but I think one thing that I would do that really helped me get better was like kind of be like, okay, like today I'm gonna try this thing, right? Like I'm just gonna try to get to an underhook and stay in the underhook. Or like I remember even when I was a white belt, I wanted to learn how to do berimbolo. Like I was obsessed with berimbolo as a white belt, and I couldn't hold De La Hiva guard. Like I would get to De La Hiva and just immediately get leg dragged to like oblivion.
Right.
So I said to myself, I was like, if I can't hold someone in De La Hiva guard, then I'm never going to be able to berimbolo. So I started just trying to maintain De La Hiva guard. So I would do rounds, and my whole goal was just to get to De La Hiva and stay in De La Hiva. And it worked really well. Like eventually I got to be able to maintain it. And then I started knocking people down. And then I started hitting the berimbolo. And it's funny because now I look at the invariance that we get. It's like, oh, I was practicing making and maintaining my connections to my opponent. And
Right.
then I progressed to destabilizing my opponent. Once they were destabilized, I had to practice keeping their hips down and pinning them. Like,
Hmm.
so I would kind of play these like covert CLAs type games with
Hmm.
myself. And I made so much progress that way. So when I heard about this whole thing, I was like, oh, this is it. Like this is like I've been right this whole time, and everybody's just been like shitting on me, and like I was
Yep.
very like I felt vindicated. Say the
I'm
least.
glad you listened to your gut in the
Yeah,
end. Yeah. Cause I didn't. I felt the same shit, but I was like, oh, this guy's better than me. Listen to him.
I
So
think also, coming from like, I did a lot of traditional martial arts, and traditional martial arts are even worse than jujitsu when it comes to this. Like,
yeah.
traditional martial arts are like information processing as a religion. Like
Right.
jujitsu is like, like serious about the information processing approach, but not the way, like kung fu is. Like kung fu brings
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
level. Like they're like, let's completely remove all of the context from this and have you do it without any like there's not even another person there. Like you're gonna do this in the air.
yeah. Right.
It's not even gonna look like the same movement. And then, so when I started doing more combat sports, I was like, man, I think what works about these combat sports is the live training. I think that's what
Hmm.
makes it valuable. And what happened was even the movements from kung fu and the aikido stuff that I was doing and the other martial arts, like I started to be able to make it work in live training by trying it in live training.
Yeah.
So like I remember one time I was sparring with this Muay Thai guy and I hit him with like a Choi Lee foot combination. Like it was something really weird. Like I like came like this and then like this and then I hit him again. And like I was thinking to myself, I was like, man, like this is so weird because people think this stuff doesn't work, but what really doesn't work is the pedagogy.
Hmm.
That's really what's missing from it. So one thing I want to talk to you about too, because there's so much like people say ecological training, but I honestly don't like that term so much because we're not when you talk about what Greg's doing, like it's not really like I don't think it's really ecological dynamics. I think it's constraints led approach. Like it's very much CLA. And that's sort of a different thing in my like it's a subset of it, but to me
Right.
it's not it's an approach within like ecological dynamics is a way of looking at things. And then when we talk about approaches to coaching that are based off of ecological dynamics, there's constraints led approach, and then there's differential learning, right? And we hear so much about CLA and see so much about CLA, but something interesting that came up when I was talking to Brandon yesterday is that Danaher has them doing these creativity drills, right? So what this is like there's a little problem in here that we can get to in a minute too, but he has them doing these drills where they're not going at full resistance, which is probably a little bit of an issue because I don't know exactly how you titrate that.
Right.
But he'll take something like, say, guard passing or defending a wrestling shot and countering it, and have them try to do that thing in as many different ways as possible, which is that's like the essence of differential learning, which is
Right.
sort of this approach where you say we're going to use variability for variability's sake. So we're going to
Hmm.
change. One of the simplest examples I've seen with this, I think it's actually on Rob Gray's website, is when you're like, let's say you're learning a barbell squat, you each time you go to squat, instead of placing your feet in the same spot, you place your feet at different widths apart to try to feel the differences. And through feeling those differences and through that variability, you actually get overall better at the pattern of squatting rather than just coordinated in one particular position. So I'm curious, like, do you do you use like any differential learning stuff in your training, or do you kind of just focus in on the CLA aspect, because they are related? Like, you get some variability through doing CLA, but I was just curious if you try to actually implement any of these like differential learning type things, like having people try things differently just for the sake of doing it differently.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, and also go back to what you initially said. Like you hit it right on the head. Ecological dynamics is the theory that
Yeah.
information is direct, right? The
Yes.
information, the environment is enough for us to act on. Whereas constraints-led approach, differential learning are the training methodologies that are based on the theory of
Yes.
ecological dynamics. And yeah, so I would say the difference, but and I'm not an expert, especially on differential learning. It's something that I've not super well read on, but my understanding is that, like you said, differential learning is variability for variability's sake. So they try to insert a bunch of randomness,
Yes.
instead, as opposed to CLA, which does insert randomness, but with a goal in mind. Like you're trying to
Yep.
structure the environment. In a certain way, whereas it's differential learning, you're inserting randomness just so you can have, even if it forces you to solve the problem the wrong way, they
Yep.
want you to figure that out. Just randomness for randomness sake. So I do something like that, and I don't really know if this is differential learning. I don't think it is. And I got this kind of from Greg. Like, so for example, we'll do like a specific grip, like a figure four grip, a Kimura.
Yeah.
We'll start on a Kimura, but every time, and we're gonna go to submission. But every time you reset, you have to start in a different alignment. So maybe I start in like a closed guard Kimura,
Yep.
and then when we reset, now I start in a turtle Kimura. Then I start in a turtle Kimura, but now I'm facing you, right? So on and so forth. So every time you
Yeah.
reset, same grip, but the position slightly
Different
changes.
position. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Um,
I think that's probably like I was saying, like I think that CLA can encompass, like, you can kind of have like a mixture of both, like
right.
that's sort of like a differential learning take on some CLA. Do you know what I mean? Like, you kind of
Yeah.
integrate. There's a degree of integration between the approaches. But yeah, no, that's a cool drill. I like that idea.
Yeah, it's really good. I just don't know if that's considered technique because it gets nuanced here.
Yes.
I don't know if it's
Yes.
considered it because it's with an intention in mind. I want them to be comfortable using that figure four from anywhere because people look at the Kimura as sort of a positional thing. So I want
Yes,
them to
absolutely.
be able to use that from anywhere to get to a triangle, to get to whatever it is. And actually, in fact, that what we would do from there, and also I keep saying I get this from Greg. I just don't want to take it.
No, no, no. It's totally
I want to
fine.
make sure I give credit where it's due.
Of course.
A cool precursor condition that we had from there is like figure four, but you have to lock a head and lock a circle around the head and the arm first. So whether I do that
Yes.
with my legs or my arms first,
Yes.
that's the precursor prior to the submission. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of different ways you figure out how to wrap the head and the arm.
Yeah.
Given this, I mean, I was in bottom half guard with the Kimura, and I was able to get to back triangles and shit.
Yes, no, absolutely. One interesting thing that I've been playing with some of my students is exploring different triangles and working on, because one thing I learned from Greg that I think is really important is like this concept of dual limb control, which, like, kind of Danaher talks about a little bit with legs as being
Hmm.
double trouble, right? But when it comes to the upper body, I've been able to really, really up my percentage of submissions by aiming to progress towards essentially leg triangles, right? And one of the interesting things I discovered was, so I started out playing this game where I would have a person start in like sort of like a backside side control, like the person's turned away from you and you get a seatbelt grip. And I would just keep it really simple. I would tell my students, replace your arms with your legs, right? So you have your arms locked around their head and their arm,
Hmm.
replace your arms with your legs. And we had some success with that. I started them on their knees. I would have them start seated with their legs in a straddle split and make it a little bit easier.
Hmm.
And with some of the kids, I noticed they were having trouble. So I thought maybe if I progress this towards, I'll give them one leg. So like now we're starting with one leg and one arm, right? So your leg is connected to your arm. So it's you're like
Right.
almost in a triangle, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm saying like
You're
just
closer to the end.
exactly.
Hmm.
Just finish this, right? And that worked a little bit. Now, this is the weird thing, and sometimes this stuff really surprises me about you discover really interesting stuff when you play these games. So that class was okay, right? So I came back next class, and for whatever reason, I was just thinking, let's get them finishing. So we started in Gyaku, Yoko, Bushiro, Omate. So the four more common triangles. The Hansai Sankaku is a little hard to get to. So I just was like, let's leave this out because it's just going to be too complicated for them to get into it. The rest of them you can get into relatively easy. So we started in the fully locked triangles, and there was some finishing going on, not a crazy amount. But then I went back at the end of class to that first game that we played. I just said, okay, we're on the backside and connect your legs around their head and their arm. And all of a sudden they were doing it.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because having them train the end state and get comfortable in the end state actually did more for them getting to the position than having them try to practice getting into the position. So it was very interesting. I had a similar experience with front headlock. So I was having them play kind of a classic game that a lot of people know about. I think it was posted pretty early on standards page. Was, you start in a standing front headlock scenario and your job is to keep the opponent's hands on the mat, right? And try to continuously return
Hmm.
their hands to the mat.
Yeah.
They're trying to escape the front headlock. So it's terminal for one player, continuous for the other. Um, and the kids were really having trouble for whatever reason. They weren't committing their weight to the other player's back. So I said, you know what? Let's start with the hands on the ground in like a quad pod scenario and just try to hold them there. So we did that for a little while, and then when we went back to the first game, they were much better at it.
Right.
So I think that one of the themes that I've noticed with this stuff is if you play the end point first, a lot of times it helps you to develop those earlier stages. So it's like a lot of times it seems like it actually works better if you work backwards. Have
Yeah.
you found anything similar like that?
Yeah, especially with the beginners. I mean, if we're working with
Yeah,
the competitors, advanced guys, I want to see them struggle more. Um, than you. I mean, yeah, unless it's something that I really don't see them do,
yeah,
and I really want them to feel it out first, I'll start them at the beginning and work them to the end. Um, but yeah, other than that, with kids or with beginners, start them as close to the end as possible, even if it's a fully locked in triangle choke. I don't
yes,
care.
yep.
And then you can work backwards. Maybe then you start with ankles crossed and you got to work to that figure four or
Which
whatever it
from a
is.
theory standpoint makes sense, right? Because there's in terms of CLA, like there's less variability in those end positions. So you're starting in a lower variability situation, developing some skill, and then slowly moving towards situations where there's higher variability. And that's an easier way to sort of like create an on ramp for people who are newer.
Yeah, yeah, and also, something to consider is that it takes time to develop these skills.
Yeah,
I look at the room and I'm always trying to see, is the game too easy or is it too hard? It should usually be somewhere in the middle. It should look kind of messy. If they're having tremendous success, they're just strangling each other left and right. I'm like, all right, forget the figure four. Start with your ankles crossed, or start. Sometimes I'll even have them start legs unlocked, and because maybe I'll see they're not controlling posture well.
yes.
Legs start unlocked, and you're not allowed to cross your legs. You just have to keep their posture down using your arms
Control
and
the
pinching
head.
your knee. Yeah, keep their
Yes.
head
Yeah,
close
yeah,
to
yeah,
you.
yeah.
That's it.
I,
But
I'll
yeah,
often
like
have them play the same game, but give them different points of focus. So, like, I'll
yeah.
say, like, okay, like we're in a trap triangle. Your job is to control their head and keep their posture down and maintain tightness. Or we're in a trap triangle. Your job is to move the arm across and progress towards shin behind the knee. Progress from
Mhm.
crossed ankles, semi sankaku, full sankaku. Right. So, like, it's it's the same game, but the focal point is different. So you can develop like these different sub skills within the same game,
Yeah,
which in some ways, it's so hard in jujitsu compared to some other sports because there's so much you have to do so much verbal cueing, and you want to avoid that, right? Like because it's just so ineffective. Like
right.
talking to people is the least effective way to communicate information with them, but it's challenging in jujitsu to get around that.
Yeah, that's why I mean the biggest thing is have them experience it.
Yeah,
Like if they've experienced the problem, you could kind of talk to them all day about it because
yes.
you tell someone that they have tell someone how to solve a problem they haven't experienced, it's gonna go in one ear out the other. I
Which is
see it
exactly the
all
problem
the
with
time.
technique. That's the whole problem with it, is
Yeah,
that
that's the exact
you're
problem with
you're
it.
just
Yeah.
being spoon fed somebody else's solution to a problem you don't even know about. It's funny because like a lot of teachers who are like trying to do their due diligence but still in that old kind of mindset, they're like, I'll see them like trying to explain like why the technique is necessary.
Yeah.
Like they're like, okay, like to do that, if you want to do a duck underpass, like the reason you do this is because the person has a really good guard and it's really hard to get to the leg drag. Like otherwise you would just leg drag them. And it's like they have to go through this whole drawn
Yeah,
out like
yeah.
storytelling thing
Yeah.
to get to the point of like, okay, yeah, like this is why we're doing this move. This is why you need this particular solution.
Right. And I love when they're like, and sometimes they'll do this, but sometimes if they want to, they'll go here. So when they do that, you got to go here. But sometimes when they, what my brain's fried. I don't know. I
My
was
my
focused on it.
absolute favorite though, and you get this with people, and you kind of have to pay attention. Is like they'll tell you like, okay, when they do this, I do this, and then you go and watch one of their matches, and it's not what they did at all. Like they'll say like
Yep.
this match, I did this thing, and then you like watch it, and
Oh, dude.
you're like that's actually not what you did. Like, it's like their memory of it is like different. Like they, it's like, oh man, like maybe this isn't the best way to approach
Man,
teaching.
that reminds me. There's recently a B team video with Owen Jones and Dima, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. I think it was like either a specific way he hits like the ankle lock, or maybe it was like
Yeah,
the reverse guard toe hold, and he taught. I think it was that one,
yeah.
the reverse guard toe hold, um, and and he did a round with Chris Wojcik. But prior to that, Demo was explaining like this is how Owen Jones likes to do it. When he does it this way, it's very hard to escape. And then you see him do a whole entire round with uh with Chris Woj, and he didn't do that at all. Like
Oh, yeah,
not
yeah.
even one time.
You didn't
It
do
was
the
his
big
whole
one.
seminar at B Team on the specific way to do it, and
Yes.
you saw his round. He didn't do it one time, bro. It's
And the thing
ridiculous.
is, like in his defense, there's probably a legitimate reason why he didn't do it that way. Like he was probably just like actually attuned to the
Resistance,
affordances that were being presented to him rolling with Chris Wojcik and was like,
right?
this would be a bad choice here. Like,
And
you
Chris
know,
isn't gonna let that happen, so obviously
yeah.
you gotta do something else.
So funny. One question I have for you, and this is a problem that I've been chewing on for a while. It's kind of like a pet project of mine. Is like, how do we train skills where there's a short window of opportunity where it's available? Because sometimes creating games around that can be challenging. Like I think a double leg is a good example, right? Because the hard thing with a double leg is like grabbing both of their legs with good enough posture to finish it. And like if you grab both their legs with good enough posture to finish it, like it's very easy to finish. And
Mhm.
if you don't, then you're probably not finishing it. And like it seems to be a little bit difficult to design games around that. Like, do you have any? Have you encountered this at all with certain positions or certain skills? Like, how do you deal with this?
Well, I guess like the question more is like for the double leg specifically, let me think. So what kind of issues are you seeing with your room specifically that you're identifying? Like they're not like shooting from the open to get to to both legs, or are they getting to a single leg then both legs? What are you trying
One
to
one of the bigger ones is not perceiving the opportunity to shoot the double when it's there.
right?
And I would say another one is not being able to hand fight into the right situations to make the double leg happen.
Hmm.
And then also understanding when your posture is buried and you need to transition to other types of movements to either escape being sprawled on escape front headlock or sort of reshoot, cut the corner, and try to build posture again and make another attempt on the double leg. So I
Hmm.
think those are like three of the problems that I'm seeing. But I'd say the biggest one is this inability to perceive the affordance of the double leg.
Right.
Like it's being afforded to you, but you're just standing there not taking that affordance.
Are they taking the singles?
More than doubles.
Okay.
More
You know,
than
I
doubles.
realized with this specific problem,
Yeah.
at least for myself, is like double legs are kind of a daunting thing because when you get caught under someone's weight, you never want to be under there again, you know. So
Yes.
so
Yeah.
naturally you try to avoid doing them. So I experienced this problem early on, and I'm like, how can I get these guys more comfortable carrying people's weight? So same thing as we were talking about before. I would start them closer to the end, and
Mm.
this game really sucks. I mean, it's not a fun game, but I would have them start with hands locked b between the knees and the hips,
Yep.
right? And head above their own hips, and they're on a knee. Their only goal is try to keep their head above their hips and keep their hands connected, while a defensive player tries to free themselves however they can,
Ah,
focusing on like putting the nose in the mat. So they're
that's a
just
good one.
there like adjusting all they need. They can switch knees, they can put their head to their side as long as they stay connected to both legs, they keep it going,
That's great.
right?
That's
Now that's more so like for the confidence of one you shoot in, how does it feel to carry someone's weight? You know, and I even tell them like you want to increase the difficulty, start with hands wrapped and then work to locked hands, or just try to
yes.
keep hands wrapped and see how long you can maintain that.
That's a good one.
So that they really early on feel what it's like to carry someone's weight. And then aside from that, I'd probably just get them more comfortable tagging legs first, right? So Greg just posted a game
Yeah.
with Noah that I thought was pretty good, where you either
Yep.
get to the wrist or elbow, and then you get to the legs. I
Yeah.
adapted that game a little bit further because I thought I think it's a great game, but especially for something like double legs where you're likely to carry someone's weight, especially if you shoot from the open and it's
Yep.
telegraphed. So I had to do the same thing. Get to the wrist or the elbow, just a hand on the wrist or a hand on the elbow, and use that to close distance to like inside ties or like an underhook,
Yep.
or get behind the elbow. So I want them to go
Yes.
from the outside to as close as possible, like inside ties, underhook, whatever it is, just between the elbows or behind the elbows, and then shoot
Yes.
from there,
Got it.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
No,
so
that makes perfect
or
sense.
maybe
Get them
just
a
tag
step
legs
closer.
early on. Yes,
Get them a
yes,
step closer to the body, and then it's easier to hit that shot.
right.
I think kind of like refining my question is like, so there's sort of a particular like affordance that I think is really valuable with double legs is like, let's say I have like a collar tie or even a front headlock scenario, right?
Hmm.
And the opponent's trying to posture up out of that. You have this window of opportunity where the person's like they're lifting their body up
Right.
and they're putting themselves like in a movement vector where it's very difficult for them to defend the double leg. And I think
Right.
that's sort of like what I've been like kind of turning over in my head is like how do I train people to see that, like how do I get it so that they can feel when the other person's pulling backwards and they can snatch those legs,
Hmm.
right?
I'm thinking, just off the top of my head with that specific problem, I don't know if this is the best approach, but something I'd probably start with is like, if I really wanted that if I wanted to see them like locking hands around both legs more, I'd probably, the dilemma I'm thinking of is just getting their hands to their floor or getting to the legs, right? Because as you start pulling in their head and shoulders and bringing their hands to the
Yeah,
floor and they resist you, their head comes up, their arms come up, which affords you the opportunity to get
that
underneath
makes
them,
perfect sense.
right? So
Give
like
them
may, may
that space to work in. If they keep playing in that space, they're eventually going to find that dilemma.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
something that and I don't know, I want to talk to Greg about this too. And this is something I've been playing with. I've actually found it pretty helpful so far, but I've been giving my students priority. So for example, if I want them to do more double legs, I will tell them, look, we can score a point by getting their hands to the floor or by locking hands around both legs, right? But if I touch hands to the floor, you only get 1 point. If
yes.
I lock around both legs, you get three.
I've
You're
been
trying to
doing
beat your
this
opponent.
too. I've been
Yeah,
doing this too, and it's so funny because I wasn't sure about it, and it's funny how we always look to people for authority. Like we have an idea, and it's like I'm like I think this is a good idea, but I need
I'm
to see
trying
somebody
it.
else doing it first. But I watched this video; it's really good. If you haven't seen it, I'll send it to you. But it's a CLA judo class by this guy Cal Jones on
Oh, I
foot.
I, I talk to Gal Jones every now and then. He's a really
Oh,
good dude.
Have you seen that video on foot sweeps that he
I don't
did?
think so. I don't think so.
It's so good. So he has them play tug of war, right? They have to hold the gi and drag the other person back,
I
and
think I have seen
you
this.
get 5 points if you drag them out. But what happens is because the people are pulling on each other so much, it creates this really easy affordance if you can just kick their leg out,
Right.
right? So you get like 1 point or 2 points if you get a foot sweep. But because you're trying so hard to pull each other out, it creates this environment where Kouchi and Kosotogari are just like easy.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
a really cool game, but that's what ultimately inspired me to just go ahead with the points thing. I was like, no, this points thing is legit and it's real. Like it's a great way. Like, and with kids, it's really effective because kids are just like points. Like I want more points. Like yeah, like 5 points. Oh, I'm gonna do that thing. And with adults, sometimes I feel like I have to explain it to them. Like I'm like, listen,
Yeah.
there's a this is to create the right environment so you can learn what we're trying to do. Like just like you have to believe in these points for the sake of what we're doing. Just like buy it. All right.
Yeah, honestly, like sometimes I'll even just say because some of my adults are literally rolling their eyes at me while I'm telling this point system. So I'm like, if you don't care about points, just go for the double leg more. Shut up.
Yeah, exactly. Like the reason it's 4 points is because I want you to do this thing more. It's
Yeah,
fun,
yeah. Just
right?
prioritize the double leg. Shut up.
So, like, kind of coming like towards the end here, like, what advice would you give to coaches? And this could be like maybe you could like break this up into like, okay, you're like, you're not doing CLA and you're against it, and then also maybe some advice for people who are doing CLA and what you think the most important things are in that regard. Like, what should be on the forefront of their mind when they're teaching this way?
Yeah, man. That's a tough one. I probably have like a bunch of answers for this one, but I'll just tell you what comes to mind. For coaches that aren't into CLA, you're fucked. No, I'm kidding. Uh,
Stop
good
existing,
luck, amigo.
please.
No, but just do what I did. At the very least, like try to read into it to poke holes into it. If you want
that's
to,
that's what I would tell them too. Is like, just can
yeah,
you just look at the literature? Like, read one book by Rob Gray or listen to it on Audible. Like, just like check it out.
yeah,
You
check it
know?
out. Come back, talk shit to me. I'm
Yeah,
open-minded, you know?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then yeah, just look into it with the idea of like you got to understand both sides of the argument
Even if you
to
come into
argue
it
either side.
biased, like this is wrong. Like understand what you're criticizing.
Yeah, I've done both sides. I was drilling
I
for a
remember.
decade, you know. He remembers.
I remember. It's
But
smart,
I'm
mate.
glad I'm glad I was open-minded enough, because at the end of the day I didn't care about being right or wrong. I cared about the truth. And I have athletes that need to get better. So I'm not gonna keep the veil over their eyes. And
Yeah,
some
no,
of them
totally.
some of them fight back. We've had students leave because of it. But
I
it
was.
is what it
I
is.
remember that. I'm in the
You remembers that too.
chat. I was.
Yeah, and then CLA coaches, I would say like move fast and break things, fix those mistakes later. Don't be so afraid to
Yeah,
make
like
mistakes. It's
don't be
gonna
afraid to do
happen.
it wrong.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
be afraid to do it wrong. I do it. I'm sure I think on last Thursday I ran a game where I'm like, could design a little better there because on Thursdays we do a Q&A day where we design games on the fly. So sometimes I'll realize a flaw in the game like while it's happening. I'm like, oh, let it play out. I gotta let it play out because this is
I,
part of the
I
game.
was playing the front headlock game with the kids, and this was one of the times where I had to introduce the points. I was like, all right, and if you touch the floor with your hands, you lose. So they're all face planting on purpose.
Yeah, yeah,
They won't do this. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm like, no. If you fall on your face, that's worse than
yeah,
putting your
yeah.
hands down.
I'm like, same thing with like leg entanglements. Like if your hips hit the ground, you lose, right? So like they're off balancing from leg entanglements, and then like they fall, and they're like in a full neck bridge. Like,
Like my hips are not on the ground.
yeah, it's like bro, you're down, you're
Like
fucked.
this isn't good for you. Oh God, it's so funny. Like, but it's
Yeah,
it's it's tricky as a coach sometimes because you have to be really careful with your language. Like you're like you
yeah,
want to try to find these succinct ways of describing the game and not having to say, and also don't do this, and also don't do this, and also don't
yeah,
do this. But then
yeah.
you find something succinct, and then it like allows for this weird possibility of like, yeah, if you're in outside ashi and they sweep you, like you could do a neck bridge, and technically your hips don't touch the
Yeah,
floor.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You gotta explain these nuances. It's ridiculous. Yeah, it
um,
happens way too often.
and then do you have any what would you say to like students who like if you train in a gym where they're not doing CLA, like do you what would your advice be to them? I mean, obviously like leave
Get
is
out.
on the table.
Get out.
but like like some people are really loyal and they have stuff
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
that. Like what would you tell them to do? Like how can they kind of start to implement this stuff in their training? When it's not what's going on in class. Like, should they just form little like cabals and train on their own and do it, or
Well, I think first of all, like if your instructor is a little bit sensitive to that kind of thing, then like don't try to convince them. Like
yeah,
just stay in your own lane. It's fine. If loyalty is your thing and you don't want to leave, you love them there, that's fine. But and just don't ruin your relationship over it.
yeah,
But yeah, I would say definitely like when you go to first of all, I personally wouldn't even show up to drill. If you want to waste your time like that, that's fine. But I would probably just try to show up just for the live training. Constraint led approach doesn't have to be games.
yeah,
It could just be an intention that you set, and maybe you could self-constrain. Like there's
yes,
nothing wrong with that. Or
absolutely,
maybe you go to open mat, and you ask someone start in this position, and I'm trying to do this. You're trying to do this. If they're open-minded to that, like if you could get someone to play
yes.
certain games with you, where you could solve certain issues, and you could definitely
I
get that
think
shit
that's a
done on
good
the side.
idea.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of skipping drilling too. I mean,
yeah.
it's not the most respectful thing, but I
Talk to your coach about it.
I've spent many a drilling session in the bathroom.
Yeah, 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 yeah. With a bad tummy,
Yes,
just
I
scrolling
drank too
Instagram.
much pre-workout, coach.
Yeah, yeah,
I need to go to the bathroom before we
yeah,
train.
yeah. It's funny. When we switched from drilling to constraint sled, we still had people showing up late for a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
just used to doing it. But now that's mostly been done away with. Because
But that's
if they miss out at the beginning, they miss the wrestling.
it's also the thing though is that like for me like training is so fun. Like I've
Yeah,
always loved live training, and like dude, like to get to come to class and do an hour of live training is like before you do the rolls, to
yeah.
just do CLA instead of doing drills is like it's just like twice the fun. I mean,
Yeah.
like I'm just like
It's
this
all the
is
fun
so
stuff of
much
jiu-jitsu.
fun. I mean, you would think like people who like aren't serious about like if you're not super serious about jiu-jitsu, like this is great. Like you don't have to do all that boring stuff.
No,
Like
I mean I see like dude, there's some people that I could tell you about in private in the area that are like, bro, they are so anti CLA that they refuse to play the games at all. They were 100%. They'll say, I know I have a friend. I'll tell you in private. I have a friend who runs a school nearby. He has some pretty high level students that come to train with him, and he'll try to run a constraint sled practice, and they'll straight up, no, we're not doing that. And then
yeah,
they'll just they'll go and drill, and they'll try to convince him like, nah, if you train without locking, if you do a round without locking your hands, you're only gonna teach yourself to not lock hands when it matters. It's like, okay, bro, you're
I
shooting
have
from
a
the hip.
competitor at my gym who I honestly think they just don't like me. Like they just have a personal issue with me.
Yeah.
And since I'm the one who introduced the CLA, they like every time we do CLA, they just grab someone and go in the back corner and start drilling.
Right,
And
right.
I'm always just like, I'm like, yo, if you want to
Whatever.
waste your time and not get better, like this is cool. Like I've gotten so much better doing this stuff. I've
Dude.
developed skills. I mean, like, like probably the last time we rolled, like I was a leg locker. Like I
Mhm.
only really could do leg locks and sleeveless Ezekiels. And like I've had tremendous progress in my takedowns and
Yeah.
my passing and just all the other aspects of jujitsu, and a lot of it I attribute to playing games around those things, and also starting to view grappling through this other lens of like what are the things that never change about these
For
positions?
sure.
What are my directives in these positions?
Yeah, my perception and actions linked now very tightly.
Yes,
I like that. No,
the
and I
couple.
seriously, when I grapple, bro, like I'm no longer freezing up. thinking, oh, what is this? Oh, I'm out of solutions here. What can I do here? I'm just like, oh, there's an elbow. Get under it. Oh, he's too far. I gotta get chest to chest. Is he flat? No,
Yeah,
he's not flat. Get him flat. You know?
I had really good success the other day. I was in full rounds, but instead of trying to get underhooks, I was just thinking of touching the other person's back. Like I was like, I'm just gonna touch their back, and I would
Yeah.
touch their back and immediately throw them by and end up on
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like sometimes when you like kind of lighten up a little bit and just take these like sort of like these game like intentions, it allows you to be more competitive with
Mhm.
what's actually important in each exchange that you're in. And I think it's just so valuable.
Yeah. Actually, that's funny. I had we had our students play a game where they had to maintain a pin, but they couldn't get
Yeah.
under elbows.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's this one game that I absolutely love, and it's so weird because you can strain away from what works, where you do no two knees down and no chest to chest, but you have to hold the other person down, and
Yeah.
it's
You have to. I play that all the time.
one
I
of my
love that
favorite
one.
games.
It's like it's the easiest way to teach someone how to put your weight on someone. How,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's just phenomenal. But man, it was great talking to you. This was
Yeah. You
a
too.
I feel like we got a lot of good information out. Hopefully people listening to this can take some of this stuff and bring it into their own training. Definitely have to come back and do this again, do a part two because there's I feel like we went through so much, but there's still so much stuff on the table to talk about. But I really appreciate you doing this, man.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, bro. Happy
A
to
lot of
chat
fun.
whenever. Yeah, bro. Good talking to you.